everyone. This is Susan Snelling. I'm a Senior Knowledge Translation Specialist at the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools. We're happy that you could join us for this webinar, Evidence-Informed Decision-Making Methods and Tools for Students in Public Health Programs. I'll just say one little piece of background about the purpose of this webinar and the origins of it. At the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools, we certainly have had a history of doing webinars that focus on evidence-informed decision-making and some of the tools that we have available to support people in building their capacity in evidence-informed decision-making and in finding ways to create the structures within their organizations to find and use good quality evidence. What we realized, though, is that students are an important part of building an evidence-informed public health field. Students learn these skills within their programs and then bring that knowledge and the knowledge of the resources that are out there to their workplaces once they enter those workplaces, or in some cases in the workplaces where they are already placed. So the purpose of this webinar is really to focus on the resources that we have at NCCMT that are particularly relevant for students in public health and related fields. And an important feature of today's webinar is that it won't just be me telling you what some of those resources are, but it's an opportunity for you to hear directly from students and recent grads about their experience with evidence-informed decision-making, why it's important, and some of the resources that they have found useful. So we welcome you, and I will introduce our three panelists in just a moment, but I will just touch on a couple of housekeeping things. So if you have any challenges, questions, concerns, and any questions for the webinar participants, please use the Q&A box that you'll see probably on the right side of your panel. It sounds like everyone is well signed in now. I'm not hearing any noise on the phone, but we will be happy to answer any questions that you have by using that Q&A function. And you're welcome to enter questions at any time. We may wait for a pause to get back to those, but we will definitely see those questions and address them during the process or toward the end. So if I can just have the next slide. After today, we will make the webinar available on our website, which is nccmt.ca. So if you know of anyone who wanted to be here but couldn't, or if you need to go back through, the resources will be available there. So our agenda for today, I'll just say a little bit about the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools and the other NCCs, in case you are not familiar with all of those resources. I'll touch very briefly on what we mean when we talk about evidence-informed decision-making, and then we'll get right to those student perspectives and the resources that they have discovered and use to support evidence-informed practice. And as I say, question and answers certainly now, at any time, or toward the end. So we're hoping and aiming that you will be able to identify some of those key features of a model for evidence-informed decision-making and the way that those fit into a process for evidence-informed public health. We'll point you to some tools and resources that support students and others to find and use the best available research evidence in decision-making. And we are sure that you will appreciate this perspective of students of their experience with evidence-informed practice and tools that they have found helpful. So we would like to know just a little bit about who's on the call. So we have a poll. You'll probably see that come up. Now, some of you may be in larger groups. I'm not sure about that. So you can designate one person to do the clicking for you. But if you would just take a moment then to answer poll question number 1, which is, what is your role? Are you an undergraduate student, a graduate student? Are you program faculty, or perhaps none of the above? So just interested in who's out there. So we're seeing lots of you graduate students, so welcome. You're in exactly the right place. Welcoming undergrad students and program faculty too, and some others who have still other roles. Hopefully we will have something for all of you. Another question, we know that some people are watching in groups, so perhaps you're solo or with a couple of colleagues, so would be interested to know the size of the group who's watching with you today. Okay. So I'm not seeing those results come up, Claire, but we will. Oh, there we go. Lots of people solo, some people in some larger groups. Thank you. And then to the next question. Some of you, I'm sure, will have visited the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools website or used any of our resources before, but it may be new for some of you as well. So easy question. Have you visited our website or used the resources before? Yes or no? And then we can bring up those responses, Claire. And if you haven't visited the website, it is at nccmt.ca. And for those of you who have visited, how many times? Is that just perhaps something that about half of you have visited before? Was that once, a couple times, 4 to 10 times, would you say, or are you a frequent user? Okay, and with that, now the hard work for you is over, trying to respond to the polls. So we will then move on to, you can sit back, listen, and I'll just do a little bit of intro to the National Collaborating Centers. So there are 6 collaborating centers across the country, all of which are focused on some aspect of public health. The National Collaborating Center for Indigenous Health is in Prince George. The National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health in Vancouver. The National Collaborating Center for Infectious Diseases in Winnipeg. The National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools at McMaster University in Hamilton. The NCCDH, Determinants of Health, is at St. Francis Xavier in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and the National Collaborating Center for Healthy Public Policy is in Montreal. So all of these NCCs have lots of webinar offerings, lots of website presence. So if you are interested in any of those particular areas, I do suggest that you check out the websites if you have not already done so. So our focus today really is on what we have at NCC MT, Methods and Tools. And if we wanted a longer title, which we don't, it would be the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools for Evidence-Informed Practice. So when we talk about evidence-informed practice or evidence-informed public health, the long definition of what we're talking about is it's the process of distilling and disseminating the best available evidence from research and context and experience, and using that evidence to inform and improve public health practice and policy. But another way of saying that is that evidence-informed public health means finding, using, and sharing what works in public health. And it's a really important question to be able to address. In public health, we are in the business of offering programs and services and influencing policy, and we want those programs and services and policies to be effective. So how can we find out what's effective? By more than just trial and error? Well, we have a model for evidence-informed decision-making in public health that points to some of those influences on how we can decide what to do in public health that will actually be effective. So starting at the bottom left, of course, research evidence comes into this. There are lots of studies published in journals that can tell us what works, what doesn't in public health. And so many of the resources that we have at NCCMT are dedicated to helping people who work in public health navigate through some of that research, finding it and using it. But there are other influences on our decision-making as well. It's not only about what the research says. We also have to take into account what's going on in the local community. So if there's a concern or a problem in one community, it doesn't mean that it's a concern across the country or across the world. So we look to surveillance information and so on to understand the health status and the health issues in a community. That has an influence on our decision-making. We also look at community and political preferences. Some things that would be acceptable in one place just would not fly in another place, and that's an important factor too. And what's already there, what's already happening may suggest that we need to implement something in one place and don't need to do it in another place because there are other agencies that perhaps are providing that service already. Public health resources, so both time and skill sets. You might have the greatest intervention in the world that's been proven to work, but if you can't pay for it or you don't have the skilled people to be able to deliver it, that's not going to be the right choice of intervention at that particular time in your community. So all of those factors taken together with public health expertise, just the things that we know from working in the field, all come together to influence decision-making about what works in public health. So a final poll at this time for you, from your observation, from your experience, whatever that experience is that you're bringing, which of these has the greatest influence on decisions about public health programs? Is it community health issues and local context? Is it research evidence? Is it community and political preferences, resources, money, time, and skills? Or is it public health expertise, judgments that we make just drawing from our knowledge of the field? So I'll give you a moment, and I will say, as kind of a spoiler, it's not that we really know the answer to this question. It will depend, of course, on the particular issue at hand, but I suspect that you already know from your experience that it's not only research evidence that influences decisions about what public health programs get delivered. Hopefully, that is an important factor, but certainly not always is research evidence the only factor. So as we start to think about some of these concepts, the influences on our decisions and how decisions get made about what to do, what works in public health, we wanted to really ask the students, the panelists, to reflect on two questions. So we've put these questions to them ahead of time. And this is what we'll be focusing on for the rest of the webinar today. We asked two questions. How are evidence-informed decision-making, and here I'm calling it EIDM, how are EIDM skills important in your studies and or in your work in the public health field? So we'll touch on that question first and hear from each of our three panelists. And then secondly, we asked, what's an evidence-informed decision-making resource you have found useful? So we will touch on that question in turn. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our presenters for today, and we'll ask them just to briefly introduce themselves. So Martha, over to you to introduce yourself to our audience today.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Martha Andrews. I presently work as a health promoter with public health sub-rating districts in Northern Ontario. I support planning, research, and evaluation with our health equity team. And as far as my educational background, I had just recently gone back to school because I really had an interest in evaluation. So I just completed a Master of Health Evaluation with the University of Waterloo. You know, despite the fact that I've been working in public health for about 10 years now. And previously I had a master's degree in human development and a Bachelor of Education. But yeah, I really had an interest in evaluation, so decided to go back.
Great. Well, thank you. It's fantastic to have you on the call today, and that won't be the last you hear from Martha. That's just by way of introduction. Next, I will introduce Vandana Dhaliwal. Vandana, please introduce yourself to our audience today.
Thanks, Susan. So as Susan mentioned, my name is Vandana Dhaliwal. I graduated this June from the Dalalana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto with a Master's of Public Health. And I've been working with the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools in Health Evidence since January, first as a practicum student and then in a research assistant role. And so I can really talk to the transition between school and the work field and hopefully give you some insight on that.
Yes, we'll look forward to that, and I know that's always of interest. So thank you, Vandana. And then our third presenter, Njie Dang, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Njie Dang, and I'm studying at Queen's University. I'm about halfway through my last semester of the Masters of Public Health program. And this summer, I did my practicum at the NCCMT, and my task mostly involved helping with an update of a Cochrane review and conducting critical appraisal of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And it's a great time to be here with you all today.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. So as I mentioned, the first question that we put to our presenters today is how are evidence-informed decision-making skills important in your studies and or in your work in the public health field? So I'm going to turn it right back to Martha just to comment on why evidence-informed public health skills are even important. Why are we talking about them at all from your experience? So Martha, over to you.
Okay, so generally evidence-informed decision-making is important because we really want to make sure that we have the most relevant, accurate, and reflective information to inform our public health programming decisions for our communities. And given that in Sudbury we service both an urban and rural population, we often need to rely on different types of evidence and sometimes we place a little more evidence on certain areas than others. So to illustrate this with an example, last year I supported our newly formed mental health and addictions team at public health submarine districts with a number of projects related to planning, research, and evaluation. And specifically within my portfolio, I helped the team to identify community health issues and the local context as it relates to drugs and alcohol in 3 of our rural areas. And we do rely on data from the Canadian Community Health Survey and things like rapid risk factor surveillance system, which is something we also have in Ontario. But we can't always get readily available data for our rural communities. And we really wanted to know a few things. So whether or not people have been impacted by drugs and alcohol in their community, the availability of specific drugs in their community, their knowledge of community supports to help people who use drugs, and finally, what people felt was most needed in their communities to help support people who struggle with drug and alcohol use. So after we compiled the data, we held a community engagement session just to verify and prioritize the actions for one of our local community drug strategies in one of these rural communities. And this helped them to create an action plan based on the identified priorities, as well as some of the best practices that were identified in the literature around harm reduction, health promotion, enforcement, and treatment. And we've actually since replicated this survey, I guess for lack of a better word, with 2 other rural communities as well, just to help inform their respective drug strategies. And those surveys are expected to close at the end of the month. So that's an example. And
great, yeah, thank you. I mean, it's one of the exciting things about public health, in my view anyway, is that you know, it is so closely connected to local community issues. It is good public health is delivered differently in different locations just because of the local context, and evidence comes into that because that helps us to understand that local context and be guided by it. So it's a great example of how evidence influences action and really gets folded into the work that that you are doing and that others are doing in public health. So thanks for that. NGA, I'll go to you next and ask you the same question. How are evidence-informed decision-making skills important in your studies and in the work that you have done?
Yeah, so for me, EIPH skills like forming a research question, researching for evidence, and critical appraisal have been very essential in my study. So, for example, in one of the classes that I'm taking, I've worked with a partner to this hypothetical assignment in which we need to write an evidence brief on firearm violence in Peel region. And for those who are not very familiar with Ontario, Peel is to the west side of Toronto. And so for this assignment, we read through Peel's report on health status, and based on their concern about an increasing number of firearm assaults, we formulated a research question using the PICO model. And based on this PICO model, I was able to construct search strategies as well as inclusion, exclusion criteria for the evidence, and use these strategies on different databases that we found fit for our proposals. And since this was a high level in exploratory research, I mostly searched for evidence from the top of the 6S pyramid, so including summaries and syntheses. And in the end, we included and appraised 2 reports by the WHO and 3 systematic reviews on the topic of reducing firearm violence, firearm injuries. And what I mean by saying that I was able to do this process efficiently and systematically was because I was able to come up with a strong method that is transparent and reproducible, which is really important when we do research. And after finding the evidence, the partner and I synthesized pieces of information that are relevant to Peel's demographics and came up with suggestions on how to improve the firearm violence situation in Peel region. So through this hypothetical assignment, I've combined some elements from the EIDM framework, such as synthesizing research in local context, which has been emphasized by Susan and Martha earlier. And using EIDM skills have made my work really efficient and my recommendations well supported using the evidence. So yeah, so that's my take on that question, and I guess over to Benna.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And, you know, one of the things that you were sharing, NGA, is just that becoming familiar with the tools and these skills that you've developed helps you to be more efficient when you're actually having to answer a question that that you need an answer to, or that others need an answer to guide their behavior. So at NCCMT, a lot of our resources are really dedicated to that sense of being efficient. You know, people may already have some skills in, for example, a critical appraisal, as you talked about, finding research evidence, but to have tools that help you to organize that or to have a process just improves your efficiency. So part of what we do is that skill building, and part of what we do is just providing resources that help people to do things more quickly, which is really important because we've got lots of other stuff to do when we're working in public health. So, so thanks for that comment. And then Vandana, over to you to ask the same question. How are evidence-informed decision-making skills important in your studies and in the work that you are doing?
So I echo, you know, what NGA and Martha have both said. It helps you really to be efficient. So EIDM skills are central to being able to make decisions about what to do next on multiple projects in a very efficient way. And so, you know, working here at NCCMT, everything we do is around evidence-informed decision-making, and we really practice what we preach. So I had done my master's at U of T, and by and large, that meant that there was a large research focus of my program, and then additionally, my area of interest was also program and project evaluation, and so I was really focused on just gathering evidence, and that's where my skills developed in my studies. But it wasn't until I started working at the NCCMT, which is all about EIDM, and looking at the full cycle of evidence use, that there was a stark difference, for me at least, from being in school, where I was mainly working at the beginning of the cycle, which was compiling evidence, and at the end where I was evaluating programs, whereas, you know, projects that I'm working on here, which I also think reflect the real work world, is that there's so much more that goes into using evidence to make informed decisions and how to determine if a program should move forward or sometimes not move forward, that I just had never realized before. And so one of the examples I can give you is that in one of my earlier projects that I worked on during my practicum, it was an evaluation of one of NCCMT's products, and from that evaluation, Susan and I actually worked on that, and we had suggested 17 recommendations, which were evidence-informed from the evidence that we had collected. And so it was to improve the user experience of our products. So, you know, for public health personnel in organizations to better use our EIDM products. And so in this fiscal year, when I came on as a research assistant, that project didn't just end with the evaluation, it went through the full evidence use cycle again. So now I've been working to implement those recommendations and operationalizing them by first considering the available resources we have, human and financial, you know, whether we should create new practicum student projects, when to be working with the web developer, and developing monitoring mechanisms to measure whether changes are making an impact or not. And so all these additional steps in adapting and implementing were skills that I just hadn't had before, and I think that comes when you have more practical experience. And so through my master's, I may have learned important elements to EIDM, but it wasn't until that I was in the work field that I realized that it was, EIDM was more than just evaluating and synthesizing research. There were so many other steps that I wasn't familiar with, and I really had the privilege to learn from a great team while working. So my first job right out of school was here at the NCCMT, and so they were really able to impart that wisdom. But, from the work that I've done here at the NCCMT and with some of our external partners who are public health employers, public health units, and organizations, now more than ever, employers are looking to hire employees that know what EIDM is and how to mobilize it to make programs more effective and efficient under increasing financial restraints and pressures. And so skills like critical appraisal, compiling evidence, adapting evidence to your context, evaluating are all transferable skills that are wanted. And how EIDM fits into it is that EIDM is a way to focus on the full evidence cycle in decision making. And so it conceptualizes all aspects of evidence use to make a decision effectively. And so the great thing is that you're not alone, and there's a lot of tools and resources out there that can help you with your EIDM skills development. And so the first challenge is always, where do I look? And hopefully we can help you with that.
Great. Thank you, Bandana. And I think this is, your experience is typical from what I've heard from others as well is, you can build those skills and have some exposure to different aspects of evidence-informed decision-making, but then putting those all together and kind of seeing the flow of how things actually happen to lead toward a decision and then get implemented and evaluated and kind of feed into the next thing that needs to happen. That's something that is best experienced in that real-world context. So thanks for bringing that forward. Now, I am noticing that someone has just lost audio. So there's a tip here that if there's a problem with not being able to hear the audio, there's the second button called Audio Broadcast on the bottom, and click play. So that may help you if you've lost audio, but hopefully everyone else is still with us. So we'll move then to the second question that we asked to our presenters, which is, what's an evidence-informed decision-making resource you have found useful? And I'll just introduce a little bit of context here around that question, and that is to do with this model. Many of you have probably seen this. We call it the wheel. So stages in the process of evidence-informed public health. And not to get too far ahead, but NCCMT does have resources available on our website to support public health practitioners in every step of this evidence-informed public health process. So right from defining the question, figuring out what kind of evidence you're even looking for, which sounds easy, and it's more complex than sometimes people imagine, where to look, what's the quality of the evidence that you're finding, how to pull it all together and synthesize it, how to adapt it to your local context, how to actually implement and sort of get people on board with any kind of new thing or change that's happening, and then how to evaluate the extent to which that evidence has been put into practice, which often leads to more questions that you have to define. So it really is a cycle, as Bandana was saying. So there are resources for all of these, but we did then ask our presenters to think about resources that they have particularly found useful. So I'm going to first turn it over to Martha Andrews to talk about one of the resources that is available through NCCMT. So Martha, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So one thing that I've found really helpful as a practitioner in particular is in supporting my work in public health is the National Collaborating Center's Registry of methods and tools. So this is essentially a free searchable online collection of knowledge translation methods and tools for use in public health. And, okay, great, thanks. So within the registry, you can either choose to search for a method or a tool, and I'll see if I can share my screen here just to show you what it looks like. All right, so hopefully you can see the registry.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So like I said, if you scroll down, you can either choose a method or a tool. You can actually choose both. In my instance, as an evaluator, I generally will look for, I'll look for a tool. And then you can further refine things by, through the evidence-informed public health step or stage that Susan was talking about in the earlier slide. Again, in my instance, I would often choose evaluate if I'm looking to see, for tools to see whether or not we've implemented something effectively in public health. I may look at define just to see for tools how to structure how we define our problem or issue in public health. So you can also, within this, you can also choose multiple steps if you're not really sure what you're looking for. And then followed by this are the knowledge translation and related activities just to further refine your search. And so for here as well, you can click on as many things as you want. So that's unlimited. And if you're looking for something that's specific, you can also use the search bar. And so, for example, in one instance, I was looking for a tool around partnership evaluation. And so you can search that way as well. So for the, let me see, the next slide. So I recently used the registry to, for one of my work assignments with the mental health and addictions team last year. Because I was asked to prepare a partnership evaluation for a community committee called the Mental Health and Addictions System Priority Action Table. So basically it's a group of individuals in our community in the Manitoulin and Sudbury districts who work together for the purpose of improving programs and services related to mental health and addictions. So, so I was asked to create this partnership evaluation tool and didn't necessarily know where to start. So I had conducted a search using the registry, and I'll share this. So I came up with two tools that I could use as a starting point. So I was able to find the partnership self-assessment tool through the NCCMT database, as well as something called the Internal Coalition Effectiveness Instrument. So using both of these tools, I was able to kind of pull what I could to be able to adapt something that I could use as a starting point, and I merged that with the requirements from the terms of reference from this group with what they had identified within their terms of reference that they felt was, I guess, criteria for effectiveness for their working group. So I took these things and then brought it back to the group and had them verify the content there. So I'll just share my screen to show you at least one of the tools that I found through the registry. So here's an example of the partnership assessment, self-assessment tool that I found. So this is something that was like, essentially I could have delivered this, it was ready to go. It's something that has established reliability and validity already. However, what I did to shorten it and just so that because I was working for the coalition, I was able to pull various bits and pieces related, for example, to synergy that you see here. leadership and the expectations around that, efficiency, and then lastly, we're looking at either drawbacks or benefits of participation in the committee. And okay, so back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Martha. And, you know, really great example kind of in practice, I think, of, you know, doing some looking at the Registry of Methods and Tools because you had an assignment to do to help this group and really felt like there was probably someone who had done some work on this already, something out there. But this is kind of an efficient way of finding what's already there, and then using that, pulling that together in a way that it helps you to do your work and supports the community with tools that are evidence-based. So thanks for that great example. And there's, as you pointed out, lots more in the registry to explore. So next, I will ask NGA to talk about a resource that really fits into that search part of the process of evidence-informed decision-making. So where are you going to find evidence about a topic? So over to you, NGA.
Yeah, thank you. So before moving on to the Canadian Best Practices portal, I just want to reiterate what Martha has said earlier. I really love the repository webpage from the SCCMT website, and it's a great resource database, and you just find any methods and tools that are relevant to your research or your program, and I just love the resource. It's really rich and relevant to public health practice. And moving on to the Canadian Best Practices portal. So this is like a compilation of health promotion and prevention programs that have been created and implemented in different settings with different populations, and they have shown effectiveness, so positive effects on the population. And when you click on the website and click on search for all evidence or all interventions, you can see that they have listed out by topics. So for examples, like divided by age groups, so infants or children or adolescents or adults or the elderly, and they also sort by different topics as well. And when you click on individual interventions, they will list out what the interventions are, what the outcomes are, and they're all described in table format. So it's very easy for me to screen through all the relevant interventions or relevant outcomes that I would look at. And one of the interesting features on this portal is that they include Aboriginal Ways Tried and True section. So in this section, you can find various interventions that have been developed with and by the Indigenous communities, and similar to other interventions, they have shown positive effectiveness, and because they incorporate the Indigenous way of knowing and they're based on a holistic approach, it's very relevant to the Indigenous community if you happen to have an opportunity to work with this population. So yeah, so that's what I got to share about Canadian Best Practices portal.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And this is, again, you know, such a great resource to be aware of when you sort of have a sense that, oh, you know, someone's probably done something like this, but you don't really know where to start looking for examples or possible options. So the Best Practices portal is great for that, and as you said, particularly if you're looking for a way to understand particularly programs that have been offered with and in Indigenous community, this can be a great place to start looking for some of those really valuable community endeavors. So thanks for that example. Good to know about if people were not already aware of that one. And then we'll turn over to Bandana to talk about another source that, again, fits into that sort of search part of the process. Where are you going to look once you set on that path of trying to find evidence? So over to you, Bandana.
Thanks, Susan. So as NGA mentioned, the Canadian Best Practice Portal is great to find evidence about interventions that are done in communities, and versus health evidence doesn't actually look at single studies. It looks at systematic reviews. And so this is probably where, you know, we're on the success pyramid, we're supposed to look for syntheses or systematic reviews, syntheses of multiple single studies before we look at single studies. And so health evidence is really a great way to kind of start off with your initial search. So health evidence was launched in 2005, and it was launched to address two issues and barriers identified with public health professionals and decision makers. And one of them was difficulty with identifying public health and health promotion literature in large medical databases. So if you have had experience searching PubMed or Medline or Embase or any other medical database, you know the difficulty of filtering through all those relevant searches or results to get something that is relevant to public health, so public health intervention versus a medical intervention. And so that's what health evidence really aims to do. And the second is to filter through relevant reviews and synthesize their effectiveness on public health intervention specifically. So it bridges that gap between the demand on public health professionals to stay current with an exponentially growing body of evidence and the limited time that we often have and resources to do that. You know, there's 1,000 other things on our plate, so systematically going through PubMed to find an effective public health intervention might not be very feasible, whereas health evidence can kind of help you overcome that hurdle where it only gives public health gives systematic reviews about public health interventions. And so over the last 14 and going on to 15 years, we have searched, screened, and appraised reviews every single month. And now we have a registry of systematic or meta-analyses that count to over 6,000 quality-rated systematic reviews, which evaluate the effectiveness of public health interventions. So it's a one-stop shop. It provides practice-based, real-world implications for policy and practice. So why this is relevant to you is that I wish I knew about health evidence during my academic career. So when I'd be searching for evidence to support an intervention that I was hypothetically presenting, it was really hard, first of all, to think of, you know, an intervention that'd be relevant to a specific population, but then also finding evidence about interventions. I've gone through the struggle of going on PubMed and trying to find a specific public health intervention and just not being able, having to comb through it, you know, over hours to kind of find reviews that are relevant to what I'm looking for. So that's why I think it would be relevant to you. So why don't we do a little demo of health evidence, just kind of see how it works and what it gives you. So, you know, health evidence is a search database, and so before you get here, you should probably have a better idea of what your question is. So why don't we make our question, do social media interventions improve condom use rates? So I'm going to share my screen here, and we should be able to do this search together. Do you see the health evidence website?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to do an advanced search, and I'm going to do an advanced search, and so my question is, do social media interventions improve condom use and health evidence functionality? You know, we have a lot of keywords, and so we're able to filter down via that. So I'm just going to use condom as the search term first, keeping it very generic, so that comes up. That's great. So another great part about health evidence is that we critically appraise each systematic review that we put on. What does this mean is that we look at the methodological quality of each systematic review. And why that's important to you as a student or to you as a public health professional is that peer-reviewed articles really don't, this might be contentious, but they don't really mean much. And so when something is peer-reviewed, it doesn't really mean that the methodological quality of how they conducted the systematic review was well done. It means that it's published and it went through a process of going through editors, but it doesn't mean that the quality of the review is something that you should be relying on. So what we actually do for you is we appraise each and every single systematic review that's on health evidence as weak, moderate, or strong. And of course, you want to be going to the strong methodological reviews first in your initial pass, and then you can look at the other literature that's out there. So for right now, we're going to leave it open. We're not going to define by quality ratings, but we're going to look at the topic area of sexual health, which I think is very relevant to public health. The intervention would be social media, mass media. So let's have a search, and we get 19 results. So, you know, just even in the first pass of having that very generic search, I was able to come down to 19 systematic reviews that are all public health related. Like if we go through the first few results, which are interventions using social media sites to promote contraception use in women of reproductive age, achievement of interventions on HIV infection prevention among immigrants in China. All these interventions are very public health, and so my search doesn't seem as daunting as it might on any other medical database. So that's a little tour of health evidence. And I had mentioned before that we do give quality assessments to all of our systematic reviews included. And so what this helps you do is look for the best quality systematic reviews that are available to you without actually having to go through the process of rating them and screening them yourself. But you know, if you're doing a systematic review yourself and you want to appraise the literature that's in your systematic review, I would highly recommend the quality assessment tool. And there's so many other systematic review quality assessment tools out there, like AmStar or CASP systematic appraisal. But health evidence was actually developed in 2005, long before these other tools were, and it rose to fill the gap and a need for a critical appraisal tool that looked at systematic reviews. And the reason why we never switched over to something like CASP or AmStar is that our tool looks at the quality of methods of public health interventions. That's what it was developed for, whereas CASP and AmStar were developed for medical literature. And it has grown scope since, but the reason why this is important, I think, why we stay with the health evidence quality assessment is that we're I think, better suited to reflect the quality rating of the studies that are public health focused versus being a medical quality assessment tool that's then rating public health interventions. So it would skew our findings a little bit. And so I'm going to pass it over to Martha to talk about rapid reviews.
So we're
sorry, just muted myself. Unmuted myself.
Great.
So next, this is another tool that you can find within the National Collaborating Center's Registry of Methods and Tools. And this is the Rapid Review Guidebook. So the Rapid Review Guidebook provides you a way to quickly synthesize current evidence around a topic. And given time constraints when you're working in public health, it's not always feasible to complete a full systematic review of the literature. So this guidebook essentially gives you a step-by-step approach to synthesize and present your evidence. So to give you an example, a number of years ago I was involved with a rapid review working group that wanted to understand whether academic detailing was something that public health could use as a strategy to teach healthcare practitioners. So essentially what academic detailing is, it's a form of continuing medical education in which trained health professionals, such as a physician or pharmacist, visits physicians in their offices to provide evidence-based information. So, for example, you may have seen, a pharmaceutical representative educating physicians about new medications, for example. So we were just wondering, essentially, would this be applicable for public health? So, Bandana, I don't know if you can give me the option to drive here, and then I'll share my screen.
Yep, ready to go.
Excellent. Okay, so this is the Rapid Review Guidebook, and you'll go through a series of steps, and so this is within the synthesize stage. So for step one, our first step was to define the practice question. So simply stated, we wanted to know if public health sub-region districts should use academic detailing as a strategy to influence clinician practice behavior. Step two, the next step was to search the available research evidence. So in our case, we located a number of systematic reviews as well as individual articles around academic detailing, and where possible, we tried to keep it specific to public health practice. And actually, Jody, our group leader, she was quite ambitious. I have to say, we still bug her about the fact that she had us review 50 articles. So this rapid review wasn't as rapid as some of our other rapid reviews that we've conducted in the past. So step three, we conducted a critical appraisal of the literature we located. And in step four, we synthesized the evidence and drew implications for our public health practice. And essentially, it was determined that academic detailing could be used as a useful communication tool, but key factors would need to be considered to ensure its success. So factors like timing, availability, the skill and knowledge of the detailer were important as well as incentives for physicians and other healthcare practitioners, like did they receive continuing medical education credits, fees, other types of incentives. So these were things that we had identified as well. So at the end, we had this nice little report, and this is quite a number of years ago now, and it was just a short report, that went through our question, methodology, key findings, and then following this, if we could go back to the, if you could take control again, Bandana. Okay, so the final phase was to go through the applicability and transferability tool. And so in this instance, we met with a number of stakeholders, which included management, community partners, other key people who may be able to inform this. And so we went through the evidence, we showed them what we found through the rapid review, and people went through this tool to be able to score whether or not they thought that academic detailing was something feasible within the public health context. And so thankfully the evidence was well received, and we were able to implement this at our health unit. And so since we've trained academic detailers to deliver, I guess, content related to low milk supply for breastfeeding mothers, low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines, and Lyme disease. So back to you, Susan.
Great. Well, thank you. So, I mean, a fantastic example of the synthesize step and then the adapt step, and how that really played out in an example that has changed practice I mean, you actually now are using academic detailing based on the evidence that you were able to pull together in this rapid review. So thank you for sharing that. That's a super example. Now, I did just see Samir has a question, is this search effective as PubMed for systematic review? So I assume that's a question about health evidence. So health evidence is a database that looks for systematic reviews broadly, but only includes systematic reviews that are about interventions, and not all systematic reviews are about interventions. So you need to understand like what's in and what's out of health evidence. But if it's about an intervention and it's relevant to public health, then it will show up in health evidence. So, you know, if you put that same topic search into PubMed, you know, condoms and social media, for example, you'll probably find other things come up in PubMed that wouldn't be in health evidence. But the reason they would come up is because either they were not about an intervention, maybe they were about just surveillance data or a theoretical paper, or if they were not a systematic review, they wouldn't be in health evidence, or if it was some aspect that simply wasn't relevant to public health, then it would not be in health evidence. So health evidence is constrained by that focus on interventions in public health. But if that's what you're looking for, then our search and inclusion criteria at health evidence should, all of the relevant pieces should show up there. More about searching. So health evidence is one place that you can search. Another one is something that NGA is going to talk about. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So this TRIP database is mostly, or I should say like a larger portion of the database is medical literature, so clinical trials and those that are more clinical-based research evidence. But they also have a great deal of high-level evidence, so like going from top of the 6S pyramid, so you got syntheses or summaries and also government guidelines. Can I share my screen for a little demo? Okay, thanks. Okay, and so I will use the my assignment that I mentioned earlier about looking for different interventions to reduce firearm violence in Peel region. So for this assignment, I went on to TRIP database, tripdatabase.com, and the great thing about this database is that you can search by keywords over here if you're comfortable with just like dropping any keywords you like, or you can also click on this PICO search, and this is like a great feature of TRIP database where if you're not sure of how to like put your research question into the PICO model, then they have it here for you, and you can see like this gray suggestions that you can just like fill out based on your research topic or research question. So for this assignment, what we did, the partner and I did, was typing in, because the question asked for the urban area. So I did urban and in population row. And then because we're looking for any interventions, it's an exploratory research, so we don't put anything in the intervention line. In comparison, because also it's exploratory, so we didn't put anything. But if you have a comparison, put to within your research question, then put it here. And then for the outcome, we did firearm violence, and also a bunch of other synonyms, and then just like click on search, And then over here, you got like these results because they somehow just limit it to the title, the urban in the title, so you can easily fix it like this. Or if you want to incorporate other synonyms in the search, you can just type in the Boolean search like you do with like PubMed and other clinical trials database. And I could do by injuries. Also, I can do the asterisk side to indicate that it might be injuries, injured, or injury. So, and then I would do a search like that. So I can, and then TRIP came up with like 700 results. So that's a lot. But then a good thing about it is that they color code all these evidence by the hierarchy or the level of evidence in the 6S pyramid. So you can see that these green ones are the higher levels. So systematic reviews and synopsis and guidelines by different countries. So in like over on the right side, they have like all of these listed out based on the colors. And then you can also filter by these types of evidence as well. So if I'm only looking at systematic reviews, I will click on that, and then that will reduce the results to 16 results. And I can just like quickly scan through all of these and click on whichever I think that is relevant to my inclusion or exclusion criteria. That's like the great feature about TRIP. One drawback of the TRIP database is that if you don't sign up for the pro membership, I think that costs a little bit. Then you can't really export these citations to your EndNote or Mendeley or any other citation machine that you have or you use. So that's one of the drawbacks. So what I did was that I had to go through the inclusion and exclusion criteria on TRIP database, not on my EndNote. So that's a bit of like limitation if you don't have the pro membership. So yeah, so that's what I got for the TRIP database.
Great, thank you. And I'll just point out something you may have noticed, and even on this slide that we're looking at right now, the difference between what you'll find on TRIP and what you'll find on Health Evidence, for example. So in this slide, so if you look down on this slide number 4, is a systematic review. So we would say, okay, probably this might show up on Health Evidence as well. But because this is factors associated with youth gang membership, it's not really about an intervention. Like, it's not trying to dissuade people from joining gangs or, you know, some other kind of approach to addressing this. It really seems more like it's just correlational research or something like that. So you probably would not see that systematic review on Health Evidence because it's not an intervention. Okay, so TRIP will probably find you other things related to your topic that might still be systematic reviews, and which might be a good thing, or it might be, if you're just interested in interventions, you will find everything that that you need on Health Evidence. So really, the takeaway lesson, I think, is know your databases. What is it that you're looking for, and go to the right one depending on your need and the focus of that database. So Bandana, you are up next in terms of another resource that you have found helpful, and just reminding people again of those stages in the process of evidence-informed public health, and this is kind of overall there. So over to you, Bandana.
Yeah, so I just wanted to recap for everyone. You know, my co-panelists and I have presented you a few databases, and so the databases fall within the search step over here. That's the orange triangle, and Martha had mentioned, you know, the registry of methods and tools, which goes around the full cycle. And so you go there to find tools or methods to support you in this full cycle, or the Rapid Review Guidebook, which also works across this whole cycle. But you know, as students or as graduate students, how do you figure out where strengths and weaknesses lie? How do you figure out, you know, if you know how to define, or you know how to search or appraise or implement? And I think that's a very valid question. So for myself, just having completed my master's in June, I thought I'd be very well versed in research. And I certainly am, but, you know, in certain aspects over others. And so the tool that I'm recommending for maybe all of you to do in the short term, or like immediately after this webinar, I would really hope you would, is to do the EIDM skills assessment. So it's a resource offered by the NCCMT, and what it does, it has 20 questions that ask that are problem-solving questions, which you go through, and it lets you know where you need a little bit more work to develop your EIDM skills, or where you're actually, you know, fairly proficient. And so it's an opportunity to continue growth and you know, constantly learning, because the field is always evolving. Education is trying to keep up with the field, and this is just kind of a way to see where your strengths and weaknesses lie at this point, especially because, you know, you are still in school, and so it offers you up the opportunity to explore where you might have some room for improvement in your courses or in your assignments, and kind of highlight those so you have more practical experience or skill going into the job field. So, you know, knowledge and skills for EIDM are important for public health practitioners to integrate EIDM in their practice. So if you're new to EIDM, the skills assessment can really get you to a great place to start to identify areas where training is needed, and then and it's all self-directed learning. And if you're intermediate or advanced in EIDM, then the tools help you discover specific areas for further improvement. So I just want to highlight again that this is not a test. It shows you where your strengths are and where there's room for further improvement. And so I think it's a great opportunity just to learn more about yourself and be more proficient and focused in how you want to progress forward in your academics or in the field later on. So I'll share my EIDM skills assessment that I completed a few months ago. And so it highlighted 5 areas that I do have room for improvement. And the great thing about these assessments is that they don't only tell you where you need more work, but they also provide you a way to actually act on it. So if we look at the first area that it had highlighted to me, which is applying the results of a study, right underneath, it actually links me to other resources that can support me in that. So my next step, according to this assessment, is to go to the assessing the applicability and transferability of evidence learning module. And so all these areas for improvement are linked to some resource that can help you learn more about it, can help you engage in that learning process to develop those skills. So, you know, one of the resources here is the learning module, as I mentioned, that was suggested for me. And so what the learning module is, it's another, these modules are completely free. And even if you're not prompted to use the learning modules from the skills assessment, I think you should still definitely check them out. There's these modules are completely free, and there's 13 of them in total. After you complete each module, which usually takes 2 to 3 hours if you really sit down and get through it, it offers a certificate at the end of the completion. And these modules span the whole EIDM cycle, from search to appraise to back to evaluate and define. They are looking to support your knowledge and understanding of each of these steps, and kind of getting you ready for EIDM practice. And so there's a lot of, if you've always wondered or if you've never really had the opportunity to do critical appraisal of systematic reviews, we have 4 modules that can help you practice critical appraisal of guidelines or systematic reviews or quantitative single studies. And so you can go through those practices. There's also a module on organizational change. So we offer quite a bit on this platform. And again, it's the pedagogical tool. It can help you in your learning. And if you already think you're well-versed in EIDM, it can just be used as a refresher. And I think, I always find myself going back to some of this content while I'm at work. And it's just a great resource to have on hand and to be, to just know about. And so I just wanted to point out the online learning modules as well. And I just wanted to flag that these modules are actually getting a makeover in April next year. So keep an eye out for that. They'll be available up until then. But in April, they'll have a slightly different link. So definitely keep an eye out. Some exciting stuff coming.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. And so this is Susan again, and we're getting close to the end of our time. But just to piggyback on that, Bandana's comment about online learning and what's available, if you want to build some skills or just brush up on some things related to evidence-informed decision-making. The online learning is great. And then if we can go to the next slide, also on the NCCMT website are some very short videos about understanding research evidence, so like 4 or 5 minutes that talk about what is a confidence interval, how do I understand a p-value, and factors like this that really help people. For example, when they're reading through a research article and maybe it's been a little while since your statistics course or maybe some of that stuff, didn't really stick for you, these are meant to give you that answer in 4 minutes. If you're not quite sure how to interpret a confidence interval, you could figure that out just by watching this very short video. So the Understanding Research Evidence videos are there for you to support that aspect of just understanding some of those terms in research. And then the next slide and the final piece that I'll just point you to is all of the resources that we have on the NCCMT website have been mapped to or organized by the Public Health Agency of Canada Core Competencies for Public Health, which I'm sure is familiar to you. You're probably working as students right now to build those competencies for public health practitioners. And if you're looking for resources that particularly address a certain competency that perhaps you feel you need more in or want to explore what else is out there, check out the core competency tool under the capacity development tab, and this will point you to the right direction. One of the challenges and opportunities that we have with the NCCMT website is there's a lot of content. There's a lot in the registry. There are a lot of other things on the website. So sometimes just having something like this that can point you in the right direction of the 1 or 2 tools that might be most useful for you can really be helpful. So I draw that to your attention as well. So we do have just a few minutes for questions and discussion. You will have seen, so please type in any questions or comments that you want to make. And in just a moment, I'll ask our panelists if they have anything else that they want to add. But I will just note that in the chat box, we've provided all the links to the resources that our presenters have mentioned. The slides or the recording of this webinar will be available on the website. Give us about a week to get it up there. It's on under previous webinars, and you'll see this one and maybe some other webinars that you might be interested in. So any other questions, comments, issues that people would like to bring up, please put them in chat. And Martha, NGA, or Bantana, anything else that you would like to add before we close today?
Just for myself, it's Martha here. I just really want to encourage people to check out any of the resources from the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools, as well as the other national collaborating centers. They're a wealth of information.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's really no shortage of good stuff at all of the NCCs, I think. So yeah, thanks for that prompt. All right. Well, with that, if there's nothing else, then of course we welcome your feedback. So if you're able to just take a couple of minutes, we'll use the polling process again just to get some feedback from you about this webinar. And I will also just invite you, if you have questions after the webinar, you try to use a tool and it isn't quite the one you thought you were getting, or any other questions or feedback, we're really happy to hear from you. Don't feel that your question would just get lost in the ether. Send us a note at nccmt@mcmaster.ca. That's the email. You can find that on the website as well, just under Contact Us. So please, happy to discuss this with you further. If there's anything that you would like to ask about these resources, or if you're looking for a resource and can't quite find it, we can perhaps help you with that. So please reach out to us. And thanks for being with us today. It was a great pleasure to hear from our panelists, Martha Andrews, Vandana Dhaliwal, and NGA